A man may lock a door against the whole world and forget that he has locked himself inside with the one enemy who matters. I have often wondered since that November which of us in the end is the safer, the man who trusts no one or the man who trusts one soul too many. You will have your own answer by the end of this. I am not sure I have mine. Miles Hartwell. I am glad of your company tonight, wherever the sound of this finds you. A comment telling me the city or the hour is a small thing to give and a real pleasure to receive. And if you would have these mysteries come to you as they are made, a subscription is the surest lamp to light your way to the next. Tonight we leave the domestic quiet for graver ground, a locked office in Whitehall, a dead man with a confession in his own hand, and a secret that half of Europe would kill to hold. I have called it the Cipher in the Column. It was rare for my friend Sherlock Holmes to be surprised by a caller, and rarer still for me to see him rise from his chair with anything like haste. But on the grey forenoon of which I write, he did both, for the heavy tread upon our stair belonged to the one man in England whom Holmes reckoned his intellectual superior, and who never, in my long acquaintance with the pair of them, stirred from his accustomed round without the gravest of reasons. "Mycroft," said Holmes, and there was in the single word both affection and a sharp new attention, as of a hound that lifts its head. "Watson, we are honored, and we are also, I fancy, in trouble. My brother has not climbed a strange staircase since the Kaiser was in short trousers. When Mycroft leaves the groove that runs between his lodgings, his office, and the Diogenes Club, it is because a groove somewhere in the machinery of the state has jumped its bearing. Mycroft Holmes filled our doorway as a ship fills a lock. He was, if anything, stouter than when I had last seen him, and his great pale face wore its usual look of massive, indolent calm. But the small grey eyes, so like his brother's, were troubled, and he came in without ceremony and lowered himself into the basket chair, which creaked its protest and did not waste a word. "Sherlock, doctor, I will be brief, for I have not the time to be otherwise, and the matter will not keep." He drew a breath. "Last night a man died at the War Office, a cipher clerk named Aldous Marsh of the Cipher branch, found this morning at his desk behind a locked door, a service revolver at his hand and a bullet in his brain, and beside him a written confession in his own hand that he had for some months been selling the contents of that branch to a foreign power, and could no longer bear the weight of it. That is the official account, and by noon it will be the settled conviction of every man in Whitehall, and by this evening the case will be quietly closed, the traitor conveniently dead, the scandal buried with him. It is a most tidy and satisfactory conclusion." He paused, and his heavy face set. "It is also, I am nearly certain, a lie from beginning to end, and I have come to you, Sherlock, because I have perhaps 48 hours before the tidiness hardens into fact, and the true traitor sails clean away, and because there is not another man in the kingdom I can trust with the reason I think so." Holmes had settled opposite his brother, his fingertips together, his eyes half closed. "You had best give me the reason." "Two reasons, and then the facts." Mycroft held up one thick finger. "The first is a matter of paper. The Cipher branch was, this week, engaged upon the fair tracing of a set of plans. I will tell you only that they concern the placing of certain new heavy guns upon a stretch of our southern coast, and that their value to a hostile power is very nearly beyond reckoning. There were 6 sheets. This morning there are 5. One tracing is gone, and it is the sheet that carries the ranges and the magazine positions, which is to say, it is the one sheet of the 6 that is worth stealing. Marsh's supposed confession speaks in general terms of selling secrets. It does not mention the plans, and it does not say where the missing sheet has gone. A man about to blow his brains out over a particular theft does not omit to mention the particular theft. He unburdens himself of everything, or he writes nothing. This note unburdens him of a career, and says not one word of the crime that matters most. That is my first reason, and it is a small one. "It is not small," murmured Holmes. "It is very suggestive. A confession is a door a man opens to ease himself. He does not open it a crack. And the second?" Mycroft's grey eyes rested on his brother. "The second is that I knew Aldous Marsh, a little, across 20 years of the service, and he was the last man in England to sell his country or to shoot himself. He was a dry, careful, timid, intensely loyal little man, without imagination and without nerve, the very qualities, Sherlock, that make a first-rate cipher clerk and a hopeless traitor. He had not the daring to betray anyone, nor the despair to destroy himself. He was afraid of everything, of drafts, of dogs, of his own superiors. A man like that does not sell coastal defenses to a foreign agent and then find the courage to put a pistol in his mouth. It is against his whole nature, and I have learned to trust a man's nature above his signature." He folded his hands upon his stick. "Someone has murdered a loyal servant of the Crown, Sherlock, and dressed the murder as a suicide, and dressed the suicide as a confession, and by so doing has arranged that the theft shall be blamed forever upon the one man who can no longer deny it. It is beautifully done. It is, I think, the work of a very cool and a very dangerous mind, and that mind is at this moment still inside the building, wearing the face of a loyal man and helping the authorities to close the case. I want you to find him before the file is sealed. Will you come?" "You have not asked me," said Holmes, and there was the faintest edge of the younger brother in it. "Why the matter comes to me at all, and not to your own people, who are surely equal to a locked room and a forged note." "Because my own people, Sherlock, are of the building, and I no longer know which of the building I may trust. That is the whole horror of it." Mycroft's heavy face was grave. "When the traitor sits at the head of the very branch that would investigate the theft, every ordinary channel runs through his hands. He hears what the investigators hear. He shapes what they conclude. He has, this morning, been most helpfully at their elbow, guiding them gently toward the dead man and the fled clerk. I need a mind that owes nothing to Whitehall and answers to no one within it. I need you. It is not a compliment, Sherlock. It is a necessity, which in your case comes to much the same thing." Holmes was already on his feet and had thrown off his dressing-gown, and there was in his eyes the cold, bright light that no lesser problem ever kindled. A locked room, a forged confession, a stolen secret, and a murderer who walks the corridors of Whitehall, wearing the mask of duty," he said. "My dear Mycroft, you could not have brought me a prettier thing if you had wrapped it. Watson, your hat and your stick, and, I think, on the whole, your revolver. We are going to the War Office, and I have a notion that before this business is done, we shall have some use for it." The Cipher branch occupied a suite of rooms upon an upper floor of a great grey building in Whitehall, reached by long corridors of a chill officialdom that struck to the bone after the warmth of our own sitting-room, and guarded at every turn by silent men who examined Mycroft's card and stood aside. We were met at the door of the branch by two persons, a stiff, anxious commissionaire, and a tall, spare, soldierly gentleman of perhaps 55, iron-grey, upright, with a clipped moustache and the level, courteous, faintly weary manner of a man long used to command, who introduced himself as Colonel Reginald Holt, the head of the branch, and Marsh's own superior. "Mr. Mycroft Holmes, gentlemen." His handshake was firm and dry, his grief evidently sincere and manfully contained. "A bad business, a wretched business. I confess I am still hardly able to credit it. Marsh was under my hand for 11 years, and if you had asked me yesterday to name the most loyal man in this branch, I should have named him first. It only shows, sir, that we know nothing of the hearts even of those nearest us. But you will wish to see the room. Nothing has been moved. I gave the strictest orders. This way." I formed in that first minute a wholly favorable impression of Colonel Holt, and I record it here because it is the measure of how completely we may all be deceived. He was everything a loyal old soldier should be: grave, plain-spoken, distressed for his dead subordinate, anxious only that the truth be reached and the honor of his branch preserved. He walked us to the office with the heavy courtesy of a man carrying a private sorrow, and I thought him the one solid and trustworthy figure in that cold place, and I would have staked my professional reputation that he was exactly what he appeared. He spoke of Marsh as we went, quietly, as a good officer speaks of a man lost under his command, of the little clerk's 11 years of faithful service, his precision, his want of friends, his lonely, harmless life. And once he stopped in the corridor and passed a hand across his eyes and begged our pardon and said that a man grew fond, in spite of himself, of those who served under him long, and that this had shaken him more than he cared to own. It was beautifully done. I have thought since that it was the most finished performance I ever witnessed, finer than anything on any stage, for it was played not to a house of strangers, but to two men whose trade was the piercing of exactly such disguises, and it very nearly carried them both. Holmes, I observed, said little, and watched everything, and gave the colonel the same grave courtesy he received, and only once, when Holt spoke of his fondness for the dead man, did I see my friend's eyes rest on him for a heartbeat longer than politeness required. The dead man's office was a small, plain, orderly room at the end of the branch, with a single window, heavily barred without, as all those rooms were barred, giving on to a light well far below, a desk, a safe, a shelf of reference books, and a small iron stove, now cold. Marsh's body had been removed to an inner room against the surgeon's coming, but the desk was as it had been found, and upon it, weighted with a paper knife, lay two things that drew Holmes at once: a service revolver and a single sheet of paper covered in a small, neat, clerkly hand. "The door was locked?" Holmes asked. "Locked from within, Mr. Holmes, the key in the lock on the inner side. When Marsh did not answer this morning, the commissionaire fetched me, and we broke it open together, he and I, and found him, as I have said." The colonel's voice was steady. "The window, as you see, is barred and was fast. There is no other way in or out. He was alone in a locked room, sir, with the key on the inside, and the pistol in his hand, and that note before him. I am no detective, but I do not see how it can be read as anything but what it appears." "Few things," said Holmes pleasantly, "can be read as anything but what they appear, until one learns to read. May I?" And he crossed to the desk. He gave the note first only a glance, and turned instead to the revolver, and to the place where the body had lain, with a concentration that shut the room out. He knelt by the chair. He took up the revolver in a handkerchief, broke it, examined the chambers, sniffed at the barrel, and set it down again exactly as he had found it. He went over the desk's edge, the floor beneath, the cold stove, the barred window, the lock, with his lens traveling over each in turn, and once he lay full length upon the floor to peer beneath the desk, heedless of his coat, and rose with a single fair hair pinched between finger and thumb, which he studied against the light, and then, with a small shake of the head, let fall. He opened the cold stove and probed the ash within, and drew out nothing, and frowned. He measured with his eye the distance from the chair to the window, and from the chair to the door, and stood a while in the middle of the room quite still, letting it speak to him. And I, drawing on my own melancholy experience of such scenes, made my own examination of the medical facts as they had been reported to me by the branch's own doctor, who had made the first cursory view. It was here that I was able to be of some small service, and I gave Holmes the fruit of it in a low voice as he worked. "Holmes, the wound troubles me. Marsh was shot through the right temple, and the pistol was in his right hand, all consistent with self-destruction. But I have spoken with the doctor who first saw him, and there is a difficulty. A man who shoots himself presses the muzzle to the skin, or holds it very close. The wound is scorched, blackened, the powder driven into the flesh in a dense ring. He describes nothing of the kind. He describes a clean wound with only the faintest scattering of powder about it, such as would be left by a shot fired not against the head, but from a little distance, 2 feet, perhaps 3. A man cannot shoot himself in the temple from 3 feet away, Holmes. His arm is not long enough." Holmes looked up at me, and in his grey eyes was the particular still gleam that meant a thing had locked home. "You are certain of this?" "I would want to see the body to swear to it in a court, but as it is reported, yes. The powder pattern is wrong for suicide. It is right for murder, for a man shot by another, standing an arm's length off, and the pistol afterward placed in his hand. That is the first nail, Watson, and you have driven it. And there is a second thing the surgeon's account will bear upon, if you will confirm it for me. The hour." Holmes touched the cold flank of the little iron stove. "This stove is stone cold, and has been out, I should judge by the state of the ash and the chill of the iron, since well before midnight. Yet Marsh was a chilly, careful, ailing little man, who kept his fire in, they tell me, until the last thing before he left of a night. If the stove died before midnight and was not made up, either Marsh let his own fire go out and sat on in the cold, which is against everything I am told of his habits, or he was not alive after midnight to tend it. When did the doctor put the death? He would say only, the small hours. The body was cold and stiffening when it was found at 8. The small hours will not do. I think we shall find, when a competent man examines him, that Aldous Marsh was dead a good deal earlier than the small hours, and earlier than whatever time the locked door was meant to suggest. That he died, in fact, in the early evening, while the building still had men in it, and was left through the cold night in his cold room to stiffen, and the door made fast afterward at leisure. He rose. It is a beginning. Now, at last, the note. He took up the confession and read it through twice, and his brows drew down. And here, unless I am much mistaken, is the third nail. He laid the sheet upon the desk where the light fell on it, and beckoned me, and read a little of it aloud in a low voice that I might follow. I can no longer carry the burden of what I have done. For some months past I have betrayed the trust reposed in me, and sold that which was not mine to sell. Let no other man be blamed. The guilt is wholly mine, and I go to answer for it. Holmes tapped the paper. It is Marsh's hand, Watson. I have compared it already with the endorsements in the branch register that the colonel was good enough to show me, and to the eye it is the same hand throughout, the same cramped, careful, upright clerk's fist. Whoever wrote this wrote it slowly and well, and either it is Marsh, or it is the work of a forger who had long study of Marsh's writing and unhurried leisure to do the thing. He bent closer. But observe the words themselves, for a hand may be counterfeited, and a habit of speech very seldom is. That which was not mine to sell. Let no other man be blamed. I go to answer for it. This is not the language of a frightened clerk scribbling his last, Watson. It is rounded, it is composed, it has the balance of a thing written to be read, and read by strangers, a public sentence, not a private despair. A man with a pistol at his temple and his nerve breaking does not write in balanced clauses with a care for who shall be blamed. He blots, he trails off, he leaves the half of it unsaid. This was written by a calm hand for a cool purpose, and the purpose was precisely that no other man be blamed. It fairly asks us to close the file. It is not a confession, Watson. It is a verdict, written by the judge and signed in the prisoner's name. And yet, I said, for the thing still troubled me, a jury would read it and be satisfied. It confesses, it exculpates all others. It is exactly what a suicide's note should say. It is exactly what a suicide's note should say, which is the very thing that damns it. Real despair is never so tidy, Watson, and never so considerate. He turned the sheet to the light again. Mark, too, what is absent. Mycroft's shrewd point stands. A man who kills himself over a theft names the theft. Guilt is particular. It fastens on the deed, the sum, the moment of the fall. It cries out the one thing that has broken the man. This note is all generality, trust, burden, that which was not mine. the language of a leading article, not of a soul in extremity. It confesses to everything and to nothing, because its author did not know, or did not dare to write, the particular thing the real Marsh would have died confessing, and so kept safely to the general. A forger can copy a man's hand. He cannot copy the particular shape of another man's despair, because he has not felt it, and so he gives you despair in the abstract, which is no despair at all. He slipped the sheet into a leather case Mycroft had provided for the purpose. Every line of it says the same thing to me, Watson. Close the file, look no further. The guilty man is dead. And when a piece of evidence argues quite so hard for the closing of a case, I have learned to suspect the hand that wrote it of wanting the case closed for reasons of its own. He turned to Colonel Holt, who had waited by the door throughout with the patient gravity of an old soldier. "You have been very patient, Colonel. 2 questions, and I shall trouble you no further for the present. First, who, besides yourself, held a key to this room?" "No one, sir." The colonel's answer was prompt and firm. "Marsh had the one key, on the inside, as we found it. I hold the branch-master key, which opens every door in the suite. It does not leave my person. There is no third." He said it steadily, meeting Holmes's eye, and I thought nothing of it, for it was no more than a careful officer's proper answer. "I am obliged to you. And second, I understand a junior clerk of this branch is not at his desk this morning." For the first time the colonel's composure showed a crack, though it was a crack of vexation rather than of guilt. "Dyer, Cuthbert Dyer, a young fellow of 22, junior copying clerk. He did not come in this morning, and no message from him, and his lodgings, I sent a man, his lodgings say he packed a bag and left before dawn. I will be frank with you, Mr. Holmes. It looks very black against him, and there are those already saying that Dyer was Marsh's confederate and has bolted for the continent. I do not know what to think. He was an idle, flashy young man, always short of money, but I should not have called him a traitor. Still, he has run, and an innocent man does not run." "An innocent man," said Holmes mildly, "runs more often than a guilty one in my experience, for the guilty have prepared their ground, and the innocent are merely frightened. But we shall see. That will do for the moment, Colonel. You have been everything that is helpful." We learned the shape of the wider affair from Mycroft, in a shuttered room of the Diogenes Club that afternoon, over the sort of luncheon that only Mycroft could command, and only Mycroft could eat the whole of, while a murder waited. The stranger's room, where alone in that temple of silence a man was permitted to open his mouth, was a heavy, comfortable, sound-proofed cell, and Mycroft filled its largest chair and addressed himself to a cold fowl and to the business of the nation with equal unhurried thoroughness. "There is a foreign hand in this, Sherlock. Make no mistake of it, whoever held the pistol," he said, laying down his fork. "For some weeks my people have been aware of a man in London, a certain Herr Brandt, who passes as a commercial agent in the import of German dyes, and who is in truth one of the ablest and coldest of the agents that a certain power keeps in this country. We have watched him without his knowing it, or so I had believed. A man of that stamp is never quite so watched as one supposes. He has been seen, more than once this past fortnight, in the neighborhood of Whitehall, and twice in conversation with persons we should rather he did not know. It is as certain as such things ever are, that Brant is the purchaser for whom that missing tracing was stolen, and that the sheet, unless we recover it within a day or two, will be in a diplomatic bag and beyond our reach forever. He fixed his brother with his heavy gaze. You will understand the stakes without my laboring them. Those guns are the whole of our new answer to a certain danger upon that coast, and their value lies entirely in the enemy's not knowing their ranges. Let that one sheet cross the water, and years of work and a great sum of the public money are made worthless in an afternoon, and men who would have been safe behind those guns are made unsafe, and no one will ever know why or whom to thank for it. That is what hangs upon a scrap of tracing paper the size of your 2 hands, Sherlock. I do not exaggerate it. If anything, for the sake of your appetite, I understate it. You need not spare my appetite, said Holmes. I have none while there is work. Go on. You give me 2 candidates ready-made. 2 candidates ready-made for the popular mind, the flashy clerk who has bolted, and the foreign spy who lurks about the corridors. Between them, they make a very satisfying story, and if I let the authorities have their way, both will be cried through the newspapers within the week, and the real murderer, the man inside, will help to cry them loudest. Mycroft's mouth set. That is the danger of a well-made frame, Sherlock. It does not merely hide the guilty man. It supplies the innocent world with somebody else to blame, and the world, which loves above all things to have its questions answered and its files closed, seizes the offered answer with both hands and asks nothing further. I have seen it 100 times. The tidy solution is the enemy of the true one, always, and never more than when a clever man has taken pains to make it tidy. I do not want the satisfying story. I want the true one, however ragged, and I want it before Friday, when the pressure to close this thing will become, I am told, irresistible. You shall have it, said Holmes, though I begin to think it will please nobody. Tell me of Marsh himself. Where did he live, and how, and with whom? Alone, a single respectable man of 50, no family living. He lodged these many years in a quiet boarding-house in Montague Place, near the museum, and kept by all accounts the narrowest and most regular of lives. His office, his lodging, his club of a Saturday, and the reading of his newspapers. I have arranged that his rooms shall be left untouched and open to you. If Aldous Marsh left anything of himself behind, Sherlock, it will be there. He left precious little anywhere else. Marsh's lodging in Montague Place was as Mycroft had promised, a narrow, clean, comfortless first-floor room in a quiet house kept by a Mrs. Trumbull, a starched and grieving landlady who had plainly held her dead lodger in more esteem than she had ever let him see. She met us at the door in her black bombazine, with her chin high and her eyes red, and would have us know at once, before ever we climbed the stair, that whatever the newspapers might say, Mr. Marsh had been the quietest, most regular, most gentlemanly lodger she had had in 25 years of letting rooms, and that she did not believe one word of the wickedness they were putting on him, not one word, and that if the gentlemen were come to blacken him further, they might go straight down again. "We are come, madam," said Holmes gently, "to do precisely the opposite, if we can. I have some hope of restoring your lodger's good name. Will you help me to it?" At that the starch went out of her, and she showed us up with her apron to her eyes, talking all the way in the manner of the lonely bereaved, how Mr. Marsh had taken the same breakfast at the same hour for 11 years, how he had never given a moment's trouble, how he sat up late over his papers with his little scissors and his paste-pot, at what she had never rightly understood, but supposed to be some harmless hobby of the clever sort. How he had seemed, these last 2 or 3 weeks, not himself, restless and watchful, and starting at the door, so that she had asked him twice if he were unwell, and been told twice, quite sharp for so mild a man, that it was nothing. Then she left us to it, and Holmes stood a while in the middle of the little room, turning slowly, drinking in the whole of the dead man from the traces he had left. It was a room that spoke of a small, orderly, lonely, methodical life. The books were cipher manuals, a Bradshaw, a Bible, and a long shelf of bound volumes I did not at first identify. The desk was scrupulously neat. There was a single photograph of a woman long dead, and everywhere, in racks and folders and tied bundles, there were newspapers. He was a great reader of the papers, I observed. He was more than a reader, Watson. Look. Holmes had taken down one of the bound volumes, and I saw now that they were not books at all, but newspapers preserved and bound by the year, and not the whole papers, but cut and mounted pages, every one of them the same page. The Agony columns, the personal advertisements. He has saved them, Watson, clipped and bound, year upon year. See, this runs back above a decade. Here is a man who made a study, a passion, a life's hobby of the secret messages that strangers place to one another in the public prints. The lovers' codes, the thieves' ciphers, the coded appointments, the messages in numbers and in Latin and in nonsense that fill the second column of the Times and the Telegraph every morning of the world. He turned the mounted leaves with a mounting excitement. A cipher clerk by profession, and a cipher enthusiast by inclination. Of course he was. The one grows from the other. And a man to whom the Agony column is a second language, Watson. A man who has read those coded messages every morning for 30 years, is a man who, if ever he wished to send a message that only the right eyes should read. He stopped. On the desk, set square before the chair, was that morning's Times. No, I saw by the date, the Times of 3 days past, folded open, with a firmness that had left a crease to the second column of the front page. And it lay there, not as a paper flung down, but as a paper left, placed, the one object in that scrupulous room that had been set out to be found. "He knew," said Holmes very softly, and there was no triumph in it now, only a kind of grim compassion. "Your timid, careful, frightened little clerk knew, Watson. He knew something, or feared something, in the days before he died, and being what he was, without the nerve to accuse a powerful man to his face, without a soul in the world to turn to, he did the one bold thing his whole cramped life had prepared him for. He wrote it in the only language he trusted, and he sent it out into the one place he was sure the right reader would look, and he left the paper folded to it on his desk for whoever should come after. This is his true confession, Watson, not the smooth thing on the office desk that another hand composed for him. This, and I must now learn to read it. But before he read it, and this was a thing Holmes owned to me afterward with unusual frankness, that he had let the obvious lead pull him a half-day out of his road. There was the matter of the vanished clerk, and it could not be left standing. For that same evening a telegram reached Mycroft, and through Mycroft us, that young Cuthbert Dyer had been run to earth, not on the boat train for the continent, as the popular story required, but in a mean lodging in Southwark, where a sharp-eyed constable had recognized him from the description. Holmes and I went down to him through the fog that night, and I confess that as we went, I half believed we should find our man, for the case against the fled clerk had a dreadful plausibility, and I could not yet see past it. Here was a young man of loose habits and empty pockets, who had bolted on the very morning of the murder. Add to that the missing secret and the foreign buyer, and the thing seemed to right itself. I said as much to Holmes in the cab, and he only grunted and looked out at the fog, and remarked that the things which right themselves are generally written by somebody, and that he should like to meet the author. We found at the top of a foul and reeling stair a wretched, shaking, sallow youth in a bare garret, who took one look at us and burst into tears before a question was asked, and who was, it became plain within 5 minutes, guilty of everything in the world except the one thing that mattered. "I never touched him. I never went near his room. Before God, I never—" He wrung his hands, and the tears ran unchecked down his unshaven face. "I know how it looks, my running, I know, but I swear it weren't that. It were the cash-box, the branch petty cash, sir, that I had the keeping of. I'd been taking from it, only a little, and I always meant to put it back, only it got to be more than a little, near £9 over the half-year, and I knew the quarter's audit was coming, and it would all come out. And then in the morning, there's Mr. Marsh, dead, and the whole place in an uproar, and talk of thieving and secrets, and I lost my head, sir. I thought, when they opened the books and found the cash short, they'd hang the whole of it on me, the secrets and all, and I ran. It were the £9 I ran from, sir, not from murder. I'm a thief, I own it, a petty thief, and I'll take what's coming for it. But I never harmed Mr. Marsh. He was the only one in that place ever spoke a kind word to me. He caught me once, sir, near the box, and he never told. He only looked at me sorrowful-like, and said a young man's first theft was his last chance to turn back, and I wished to God I'd listened to him, for he's dead now, and can't speak for me, and who'll believe a thief?" Holmes questioned him for the better part of an hour, coolly and without mercy, taking him again and again over the hours of that night, the cash-box, the audit, the exact manner of his flight, and the wretched boy's story never shifted in any particular that mattered, and was shot through with the small, shameful, unflattering circumstantiality that no liar invents against himself. At the end of it, Holmes was satisfied, and so, reluctantly, was I. "He is a thief and a fool, Watson, and his petty pilfering has nearly hanged him, and served him right," said Holmes, as we came away into the fog. "But he is no murderer, and no spy. His terror is the genuine terror of a small sinner caught in the shadow of a great crime, and his account of the cash-box will check to the penny, you will see. The audit will bear him out." He sighed and turned up his collar. I have wasted an evening upon him, and I knew in my heart I was wasting it, for the answer does not lie with the man who ran. It never does. The man who runs is frightened. The man who kills has no need to run, because he has arranged that someone else shall do his running for him. Dyer has been the Colonel's gift to us, Watson, or to whoever should investigate this thing, quite as much as the note on the desk. A frightened boy who bolts on the morning of a murder is worth a dozen forged confessions for drawing the eye. Tomorrow I leave the men who ran and the foreigners who lurk, and I go back to that folded newspaper, and I do not come away from it until it has told me its secret. He was as good as his word. He shut himself up the whole of the next morning with the folded Times and the long-bound run of Marsh's mounted columns, and I knew better than to speak to him. He sat cross-legged on the floor amid a sea of clippings, in his mouse-colored dressing-gown, wreathed in shag smoke, comparing, muttering, discarding, and I went about my own affairs and left him to it. It was past 2 in the afternoon when I heard him give a sharp exclamation, and I came in to find him kneeling upright with a single clipping in his hand and his thin face alight. "I have it, Watson. I have been a very long time about a simple thing, which is always humbling, but I have it." He spread the folded paper before me and set his finger to an advertisement in the second column, an ordinary-looking personal notice of the kind the eye passes over 100 times a morning, printed 3 days before Marsh died. "Read it aloud," he said. "It will mean nothing to you, which is exactly as its author intended. Then I shall show you how to hear it." I read it out. It ran, as near as I can recall, E.N. The old arrangement holds. Should the black horse come to the yard before I do, look to the last of the 7, not the first. He wears the master's coat, but not the master's heart. A. Deceived is A. Forewarned. Trust the column, not the man. "It is nonsense," I said, "or a lover's quarrel, or a matter of horse-dealing. It is none of those, and it is addressed, you will note, to E.N., which are the initials of one Ezra Nash, a retired Cipher clerk of the same branch, Marsh's oldest friend, and, I have established this morning by a telegram, the one man living with whom Marsh shared a private code, the old arrangement of the message. I have sent for Nash. He is on his way to us now, but we need not wait for him to read the plain sense of it, for Marsh, poor careful soul, has half explained his own cipher in the act of using it, as a nervous man will. Holmes's finger moved along the lines. Strip away the horse-dealing dress, which is mere cover, and what remains? Should the black horse come to the yard before I do, should I die, in the language they had agreed. Look to the last of the 7, not the first. There were, Watson, on the establishment of that branch, 7 men, the Colonel, Marsh, and 5 clerks junior to them. Number them by seniority, as such a branch numbers itself on every list and every door, and the first of the 7 is the head of the branch, and the last of the 7 is the most junior. But read on, for he does not mean us to count doors. He wears the master's coat, but not the master's heart. The master's coat, Watson. The master of that branch is the Colonel. A man who wears the master's coat, who holds his authority, his access, his trust, his very key, but not his loyalty. Holmes looked up at me, and his voice was very quiet. And the last line, the signature, the thing he could not resist adding because it was the creed of his whole strange hobby and his last message to the world. Trust the column, not the man. Trust the secret written in the public print, Watson, and not the loyal face across the desk. He is telling his friend, and telling us, in the only voice he dared use, that the traitor and the murderer he feared was not the clerk beneath him, nor the foreigner without, but the master above him. It is Colonel Reginald Holt. Ezra Nash came to us within the hour, a small, spare, white-whiskered old man, retired these 5 years from the branch, who climbed our stair slowly and sat in the chair Mycroft had lately filled, and wept a little, without shame, for his dead friend, before he could bring himself to speak. When he had mastered himself, he confirmed, in a low and steady voice, every particular of what Holmes had read. The old arrangement, yes, sir. Aldous and I made it 30 years ago, when we were young men in the branch together, half in jest, a private key for placing things in the column that were nobody's business but ours. A birthday, a wager, a word when one of us was low. It was our little secret, and we never let it drop, not in 30 years. He would place a line to me most weeks, and I to him, just to know the other was there. But this last one, the old man's hands trembled. This last one frightened me the moment I read it, 3 mornings ago, and I have not slept easy since. For it was not our usual foolery. It was a warning, sir, a warning against a dead man's day. And I knew Aldous, and I knew he would never have written so unless he was in real and deadly fear. I wrote back to him, by the same road, that same evening. Come to me, tell me plainly, let me help. And the next I heard, he was dead, and the papers full of his shame. He looked from Holmes to me with red-rimmed eyes. He was the gentlest, most timid man that ever drew breath, Mr. Holmes. He could not have hurt a fly, nor sold a farthing's worth of his country, nor lifted a hand against himself. And they are burying him, a traitor and a suicide. You will not let it stand, sir. Tell me you will not let it stand. I will not let it stand, said Holmes gravely. You have my word upon it, Mr. Nash, and Aldous Marsh shall have his name back before I am done. But you must help me to one thing more. This warning tells me who your friend feared. It does not yet prove that the man did the deed, and against a colonel of good name the whisper of a dead clerk's cipher is not enough. I must have proof that will stand in daylight. Tell me, in the weeks before he died, did Marsh ever say to you, in plain words or in your code, what it was that first turned his fear upon Colonel Holt? A man does not come to suspect his own chief of treason out of the air. He must have seen something. The old man nodded slowly. He saw a figure that would not reconcile. That was the phrase he used, in a line to me a month gone, and I thought little of it then. Aldous kept, unofficially, in his own head, in his own small book, a tally of every document that passed through the branch. It was his passion for order, sir. He could not help it. And he had begun to notice, over some months, that now and then a paper he was sure had gone out to be destroyed, or filed, or sealed, was afterward not quite where the record said it should be. a tracing signed back into the safe a day later than the register showed, a wrapper resealed with the wrong wax. Little things, things only a man with his gift for order would ever have caught. And every one of them, he told me, passed at some point through the one pair of hands above his own. He said to me, and I have it by heart, for it was near the last thing he ever told me, "Ezra, either I am going mad and imagining a hole in the floor of the world, or the master of the branch is robbing it, and I do not know which frightens me more." Nash bowed his white head. I told him he was tired and imagining things. God forgive me. I told him to rest. You told him what any sensible man would have told him, said Holmes, not unkindly. And you were wrong, as sensible men so often are before the event. Do not reproach yourself. The reproach belongs elsewhere, and I mean to deliver it. He rose and stood by the fire, and I saw the pieces assembling behind his eyes. Now it comes clear, Watson, the whole cold shape of it. Marsh, with his passion for order, catches his own chief in a long, careful theft of secrets, the very crime for which the colonel afterward frames the dead man. Marsh, being what he is, has not the nerve to accuse a powerful superior openly, and no proof that would be believed. He confides only his fear, and only to one old friend, and only in a cipher. But he is frightened enough to guard himself, to place in the public column a message that names his man against the day he might be silenced. And Holt, Watson, here is the crux. Holt somehow learns that Marsh has begun to suspect him. Perhaps Marsh, timid soul, gave himself away by a look, a hesitation, a question asked once too often. And the colonel, a cool and deadly man with a career of treason to protect, sees that his loyal, prying, careful clerk must be silenced before he finds the courage to speak, and silenced in such a way that the theft dies with him. So he shoots Marsh at his desk from an arm's length and forges a confession in the hand he has had 11 years to study, and locks the door with his own master key from the outside, and lets it be thought locked from within, and steps back to help the authorities bury the man he has murdered under the crime he himself committed. Holmes's face was hard. It is very complete, and it very nearly worked, and it would have worked entirely, but for two things the colonel could not foresee: that a dying clerk's passion for the Agony column would reach out of the grave to name him, and that Mycroft Holmes would trust a dead man's nature over a live man's signature. Now we have the shape, we must have the proof. The proof came over the next 2 days in pieces, and Holmes assembled them with a grim patience. The forged confession was the first and the surest, once he knew what he sought. Holmes obtained, through Mycroft, a sheaf of Marsh's genuine writing, private letters, his club subscriptions, the very lines to Nash, and set them beside the office confession under a strong glass. And what he found he showed to me plainly, and stated aloud for the record, so that no man need see it to follow it. Here, Watson, it is the letter K, a small thing, but handwriting lives in small things. In every genuine sample of Marsh's hand, across 30 years, the man forms his K in an old-fashioned looped manner he will have learned as a boy. The upright, then a single continuous loop for the arms without lifting the pen. It is as fixed in him as his own face. Now look at the confession. The K in burden. No, in trust. There. The writer of the confession has formed his K in the modern way, the upright and then two separate strokes, the pen lifted between. Once, a man might do in haste, but it is so throughout. Every K in the document is the modern form, and every K in 30 years of Marsh is the looped form. A man does not change the habit of his hand on the last night of his life. The confession was written by someone imitating Marsh's hand with great skill and long study, but carrying, in that one small unwatched letter, the ineradicable stamp of his own schooling. It is a forgery, Watson, and a forger always signs his work somewhere, though he never knows where. He set down the glass. Colonel Holt, I have discovered, was schooled abroad in Germany as a boy, a fact of some interest on its own account. He learned his letters in the modern hand, and he has left that modern hand once in a dead man's confession, like a fingerprint in wax. The second proof was the key, and it was Watson, for once, who helped to turn it. Holmes had established that the office door, though found locked from within, could as easily have been locked from without by any man holding the branch master key and willing to leave Marsh's own key turned in the inner lock as a blind. But how to prove the master key had been so used? It was I who recalled, from our first morning in that cold room, a thing I had noted with a doctor's eye and thought nothing of, a small, fresh, bright scratch on the inner face of the lock's keyplate, such as a second key, fumbled in the dark from the wrong side, might make against the shank of the key already in place. Holmes returned to the room, examined it, and gave a low laugh of satisfaction. "You have an eye, Watson, when you choose to use it. A man locking a door from the inside, at his leisure, in his own good light, leaves no such mark. This scratch was made by a key introduced from the outside, in haste, in poor light, grinding against the key already standing in the lock within. Exactly what must happen when a murderer, having placed his victim's own key in the inner lock for effect, then turns the bolt from the corridor with his master key. It is the signature of a door locked from the wrong side. Between your scratch and my letter K, Watson, we have begun to build a thing that will stand in daylight after all." Yet Holmes was not satisfied, and when we laid the whole of it before Mycroft that evening in the Diogenes Club, I understood why. "It is enough to hang him in my own mind," said Holmes, "and not enough to hang him in a court, nor, what matters far more to you, Mycroft, to recover that missing tracing before it leaves the country. Consider our position. We can show that Marsh was murdered, not suicided. The powder proves it. We can show the confession is forged. The letter proves it. We can show the door was locked from without. The scratch suggests it. We can produce a dead man's cipher naming Holt as the traitor he feared. Set it all together, and it is a grave case. But every piece of it is inference, and Holt is a clever, cool, respected man who will meet inference with a bland denial and the weight of his own good name. And a jury may well flinch from believing that a colonel of 30 years' honorable service shot his own clerk. And even were we to take him, the tracing is still gone, passed already, for aught we know, to Herr Brandt, and thence to a foreign capital. We should have our murderer and lose the plan. And the plan, Mycroft, is what the nation cannot afford to lose. Mycroft had listened with his eyes closed, and now he opened them. Then the tracing is not yet gone. You know that it is not? I infer it, as you would. The great man shifted his bulk. Brandt has not stirred from London, and Brandt is not a man to linger an hour once he has what he came for. He would be on the night boat the same evening. He remains. Therefore the handover has not yet been made. Therefore Holt still holds the sheet, or controls it, and is waiting. For what? For the noise to die, said Holmes at once. He is far too careful to pass a stolen defense plan to a known foreign agent in the very days when a murder in his branch has every eye in Whitehall turned upon it. He will sit upon the tracing, secure behind his forged suicide and his own good name, until the case is closed and Marsh safely buried a traitor and the watchers gone home. Then, and only then, when all is quiet and himself entirely above suspicion, he will make the delivery and take his money. Holmes leaned forward, and the hunting light was in his eyes. And there, Mycroft, is the door by which we take him. He is waiting for the case to be closed. Very well, let us close it. The two brothers looked at one another, and I saw the same cold intelligence kindle in each. Go on, said Mycroft. Let it be given out, officially, finally, and with every appearance of relief, that the matter is settled, that Aldous Marsh, poor wretch, has been adjudged the traitor and the suicide the confession proclaims him, that the missing tracing is presumed destroyed by him before his death, that the file is closed and the watchers stood down, that the newspapers have it, that the whole of Whitehall breathe again and turn to other things. Let Colonel Holt, above all, be handsomely commended for his conduct throughout a painful business, and let him see with his own eyes that the hunt is called off and himself entirely clear. Holmes's voice dropped. And then, Mycroft, do one thing more. Let it come to Holt's ears, through the ordinary channels of his branch, as the most natural thing in the world, that the coastal scheme, deprived of its stolen sheet, is to be recast, that a fresh and complete set of the plans, the all-important ranging sheet and all, has been prepared and is to be conveyed on a certain night this week from the War Office to the safe-keeping of the Admiralty by a single trusted officer, quietly, after the offices are dark. I saw it then, and drew in my breath. A bait! A bait, said Holmes, for consider what such news must do to a man in Holt's position. He has murdered and forged and risked the rope to steal one sheet of that scheme, and he believes it the only complete copy in existence, and worth a fortune to Brandt. And now he learns that a fresh, complete set is to walk out of the building in the dark, in the hands of one man, on a known night. He has already crossed every line a man can cross. Will he sit still and let a second, better prize pass under his hand, when the taking of it needs no murder, only a little boldness on a dark night, and when he believes himself entirely unsuspected? I think not, Mycroft. I think a man who has done what he has done, for the money he has done it for, will not be able to let it pass. And when he moves to take that sheet, or to have Brant's men take it, we shall be waiting, with the thing itself in our hands, and the law at our backs, and we shall have him not on inference, but in the very act, with the stolen plan upon him, beyond any denial or any good name in England to save him. He sat back. It is a risk. If he is cool enough to smell the trap and sit still, we have lost nothing but a few days, and still have our grave case against him. But if he moves, we have him whole. What do you say?" Mycroft was silent a long moment, his great head sunk upon his chest. Then he raised it. "I say that you have always been the more reckless of us, Sherlock, and that recklessness is sometimes the only prudence. Set your trap. I will see the notices printed, and the word carried to Holt's ear by a mouth he trusts, and I will see that the officer who carries the bait that night is one who can be spared and can be guarded." His gray eyes moved to me. "Guarded by you, Doctor, among others, if you are willing. For I will not disguise from either of you that Colonel Holt is a dangerous man, and Brant a more dangerous, and the men Brant commands are not gentle, and a plan of this kind, however well laid, has a way of coming down at the last to a few resolute persons in the dark with the odds even. It will not be without peril." "I have been in the doctor's chair too long, Mr. Holmes," said I. "I shall be glad of the other kind of evening, and I shall bring my revolver, and it will be loaded this time." Holmes laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. "The old campaigner speaks. We shall make a soldier of you yet, Watson, or a corpse, and I have a strong preference for the former. Come, we have a trap to build, and 3 days to build it in, and a cool colonel to persuade that the coast is clear." The night we had chosen came in cold and moonless, with a river fog crawling up from the embankment to lie in the Whitehall streets and blur the gas lamps to soft brown smears. I have known many such waits in my life, in Afghanistan and after, and they do not grow easier with the years. The cold, the stillness, the slow crawl of the minutes, the way the mind runs ahead to every disaster. We were 4 in our own party, disposed by Holmes with his usual care. Holmes and I in a shuttered doorway across the way, 2 of Mycroft's plain-clothesmen, silent and capable, in the shadow of an area railing further down, and, walking the bait itself, a young Guards officer named Anstruther, chosen for his nerve, who was to carry a locked dispatch case out of a side door of the War Office at 10:30, alone and unhurried, and make his way on foot toward the river and the Admiralty, as though he suspected nothing in the world. The dispatch case held nothing of value, a sheaf of blank tracing paper, no more. But Holt could not know that, and Brant could not know it, and the fog and the dark would give them no chance to learn it until the thing was done. We had taken our post an hour before the time, and it was as bitter an hour as I have passed. The fog thickened as the night drew on, until the lamp on the far corner was no more than a dull coin of light hung in nothing, and the great grey building across the way had dissolved into a mere denser darkness. Sounds came strange and disembodied through it. A hansom somewhere, its wheels loud and then swallowed. A policeman's tread passing along an unseen street. Once, far off, the hoot of a steamer down on the Black River. The cold worked its way through my greatcoat and into my bones, and I thought of the warm sitting-room in Baker Street, and of how much I would rather have been there, and knew at the same time that I would not for the world have been anywhere else. Beside me, Holmes stood utterly motionless, a darker shape in the doorway's dark, and I could feel the coiled stillness of him, the whole force of the man gathered and waiting. He had not spoken for half an hour. "He will not do it himself, if he is wise," Holmes had murmured when first we took our places. "He will use Brandt's men, and stand clear, and keep his own hands clean, and his own person elsewhere, with a dozen witnesses. That is what a cool man does. But I am wagering, Watson, that under the coolness there is greed, and under the greed there is the particular arrogance of the man who has got away with murder, and believes himself proof against all the world. Such a man likes to be present at his own triumphs. I think he will not be able to keep away. Watch the fog, and say nothing, and do not draw until I give the word, but have your hand upon it." Now, as the time drew on, he laid his fingers for an instant on my sleeve, the lightest of warnings, and I understood it. Be ready. My hand closed on the familiar butt of the revolver in my pocket, and I found, to my own grim amusement, that the old soldier's calm had come back to me across the years, the heart steadying rather than quickening as the moment neared, the way it always had before an action. Whatever else the doctor's quiet life had taken from me, it had not taken that. The half-hour struck from a distant clock, muffled and solemn through the fog. A side door opened and closed, a wedge of yellow light briefly staining the murk, and young Anstruther came out with his case and set off up the pavement toward us at an easy pace, his footsteps ringing hollow and lonely in the deadened street. He passed our doorway without a glance. He went on toward the corner, and the fog began to take him. For a moment, nothing. The fog, the dull coin of the lamp, the ring of the young man's boots growing fainter. Then, from the mouth of a court on the far side, two shapes detached themselves from the darkness and moved out into the street behind him, quick and low and silent, and I felt Holmes go taut as wire beside me. They closed on the young officer with the swift economy of men who had done such work before. There was a scuffle, a grunt, the sound of a blow. Anstruther cried out and went down, and one of the two men wrenched the dispatch case from his grasp and turned to run. "Now, Watson," said Holmes, and we were out of the doorway and into the street. What followed was brief and very ugly, as such things are, and I have small memory of its order, only of flashes, as of a scene lit by lightning. The two men turning at our rush, a shout in a foreign tongue, the gleam of a knife blade catching the lamplight. One of Mycroft's men came at the nearer of the pair from the shadow of the railings, and the two of them closed and went down together in a heap of struggling limbs, cursing, rolling on the wet stones. The second man, the one who held the case, whirled to meet me, a squat, powerful, silent brute who smelt of stale tobacco, and fought with a cold ferocity that had nothing of panic in it, but only the business-like savagery of a man to whom violence was a trade. He struck at me low and hard, and I felt the wind of the blade pass my ribs, and closed with him rather than be cut, and for a moment we swayed and strained together in the fog, his breath hot and rank in my face, his free hand groping for my throat. He was immensely strong, He flung me back against the wall with a force that drove the breath from my body, and starred my sight with lights, and I heard the dispatch case fall ringing to the stones between us. And as he stooped for it, I got my revolver clear at last, and levelled it, and shouted, in a voice I hardly knew for my own, for him to stand where he was, or I fired. He looked up at the black muzzle a foot from his face, and the cold trade sense in him did its sum in an instant, and found the answer. And he went quite still, crouched over the fallen case, his hands spreading slowly from his sides. From the tangle at the railings came a last heavy blow and a groan, and then one of Mycroft's men rose up out of the dark, breathing hard, and stood over his own beaten adversary. The thing was as suddenly over as it had begun, and I remember, above all, a third figure that I had not seen come, stepping out of the deeper shadow of the court to see how his purchase was faring. A tall, well-dressed, composed figure, who took in the ruin of the ambush in a single glance, and turned, without haste and without a word, to walk quietly away into the fog, as though he had merely mistaken his street. And I remember Holmes's voice ringing out clear and hard across the whole confused scene, arresting that retreating figure as no shout of "Stop, thief!" could have done. "Good evening, Colonel Holt. You have come out on a cold night to see your goods delivered, and I fear you will be disappointed in them. The case is empty. It was always empty. It was put into the street tonight for no other purpose than to bring you out of your hole to fetch it, and you have obliged us to the letter." The tall figure stopped. For a long moment he stood quite still in the swirling fog, his back to us, and I saw the whole of the man's cold courage in the way he neither ran nor cried out, nor made any sound at all. Then he turned. Colonel Reginald Holt looked at Sherlock Holmes across that wretched battlefield of a street, and his lined soldier's face in the brown lamplight was perfectly composed, perfectly contemptuous, the face of a man who has lost a hand of cards he was certain he held winning. "You are a cleverer man than the fools I have had to work amongst these 30 years, Mr. Holmes," he said, in a level, cultivated voice, without a tremor in it. "I will grant you that. I made one mistake, and it was in not troubling to learn who Mycroft Holmes might send, before I permitted the case to be closed so conveniently for me. I took the closing for my own victory. I see now it was your gift." His pale eyes went, briefly and without emotion, to the man of his who lay groaning against the railings, and to the empty case in my colleague's man's hand, and came back. "May I ask what it was that betrayed me? For I was thorough. I am always thorough." "You were betrayed by a looped letter and a folded newspaper, Colonel," said Holmes, "and by the one thing a man of your kind can never quite believe in, which is the loyalty of a smaller man than himself. But we will speak of that indoors. Watson, is the young man hurt?" Anstruther, it proved, had a broken head and a cracked collarbone, and would live to dine out on the story for 20 years. Brant's 2 men were taken, one senseless and one merely sullen. And Herr Brandt himself, that cool professional, was found and quietly detained before the night was out, though what became of him afterward belonged to Mycroft's shadowed world, and not to mine, and I never learned the whole of it. As for Colonel Holt, he stood in the foggy street and let the plain-clothesman take his arms without the least resistance, still with that terrible composure upon him, and said only, as they led him past us, one thing more, half to himself, in a tone of genuine and detached professional curiosity. A folded newspaper. Marsh. The little grey man and his everlasting personal columns. He gave a short, mirthless breath that was almost a laugh. I watched that timid creature for weeks, and never dreamed he had the wit or the nerve to leave a word behind him. I undervalued him living, and it seems I undervalued him dead. It is the only apology I shall make to him. And he was gone into the fog between his captors, upright to the last, and I never saw him again. It was some nights later, when the affair had been wound up in the quiet, thorough, invisible way that Mycroft's affairs always were, that my friend and I sat once more before our own fire, and I put to him the question that had lain unspoken between us. They will not try him publicly, I suppose. They will not. Holmes gazed into the coals. It is not the way of these things, Watson, and I have made my peace with it, though it goes against the grain. A colonel of the British Army, tried at the Old Bailey for treason and murder, the theft of coastal defences laid bare in open court, half of Europe reading the ranges of our new guns in the morning papers. No, that is a luxury the nation cannot afford, and Mycroft will not permit it. Holt will disappear into some quiet and permanent arrangement, and the world will be told that Colonel Reginald Holt died suddenly, of a chill caught in the line of duty, deeply mourned, and the world will believe it, because the world believes what is tidy. He was silent a moment. It is not the justice I should have chosen, but there is a justice in it of another kind, Watson, and I find it will serve for the one thing that will be done, quietly and completely, is this. The confession will be destroyed, and the file amended, and it will be set down forever in the secret record of that branch that Aldous Marsh died a loyal servant of the Crown, murdered in the doing of his duty by the traitor he had discovered and had the courage, in his own small way, to name. He will have his honor back. Nash shall be told the whole of it, and that, I think, is the only monument the poor, careful little man would ever have wanted. I thought of the folded newspaper on the neat desk, and of the timid clerk who had reached out of his own death to undo his murderer, and I found the thought a strangely moving one. He saved himself in the end, I said, and he never knew he would. He saved his name, which to a man like that was more than his life, and he did it with the one weapon his whole grey existence had put into his hand. Holmes reached for his pipe. It is a thing worth pausing on, Watson. Here was a man the world would have passed in the street without a second glance, and did pass, for 50 years, a small, timid, exact, unregarded clerk, who never in his life did a bold thing until the very end, and then did the boldest thing of all, alone and afraid, and knowing, I do not doubt, that it might cost him what it cost him. He could not stand up to his colonel across a desk. His nerve failed at that, as it had failed at everything. But he could sit late over his scissors and his paste pot and his everlasting columns, and out of that harmless-seeming hobby he forged, quite deliberately, a knife to leave in his murderer's back against the day of his own death. That is not the courage of the battlefield, Watson, which any healthy young fool has in him, It is a rarer and a colder kind, the courage of a frightened man who is frightened and acts anyway, with no one watching, and no hope of reward, and small hope even of being understood. I have known bemedalled heroes with less of it. You said at the very start, I reminded him, that you did not know which of us is the safer, the man who trusts no one, or the man who trusts one soul too many. I remember, and I have my answer now, and it is neither of the two I offered you. Holmes drew the pipe slowly through his fingers. You will remember that I said it before ever we went to Whitehall, when I knew nothing of Marsh or Holt but the bare fact of a locked door. I meant it then as an idle paradox. I did not know it would be answered so completely. For Colonel Holt trusted no one, and it did not save him. But it was not trust that undid him either. It was that he despised the wrong man, that he looked at Aldous Marsh and saw only a timid clerk to be used, and, when inconvenient, disposed of, and never once conceived that so small and frightened a creature might have a courage of his own, quiet and stubborn, and quite without display, that would outlast the Colonel's cunning, and reach up out of the grave to pull him down. He struck a match, and in its brief flare his lean face was grave. That is the lesson of it, if it has one, and it is a lesson the strong are forever failing to learn, that there is no man so small he may be safely held in contempt, and that the loyalty of an ordinary soul, once betrayed, is a more dangerous thing than all the daring of the bold. Marsh could not face his colonel across a desk, but he could face him across 30 years of a hobby the colonel never troubled to notice, and from there, Watson, he struck the blow that no braver man could have struck. He drew the flame down into the bowl, and the smoke rose blue between us. Trust the column, not the man. It was his creed, poor fellow, and in the end it was his revenge, and I do not know that I have ever met a truer word left behind by a dead hand. Play me something, will you? Something quiet. I find I am not quite in the mood tonight for anything triumphant. And I took up his violin and gave it into his hands, for I understood him, and he played, low and slow, some old air I did not know, while the fog pressed grey against the window, and, somewhere out in the great indifferent city, the morning's newspapers were being set in their columns, full of the small coded messages of strangers, any one of which, for all we could tell, might be another quiet soul reaching out in the only language left to it, and trusting the print and not the man. I have kept, from that day to this, a certain habit that I did not have before. I read the personal columns of my morning paper with a new attention, and now and then, coming upon some scrap of nonsense that means nothing to me and everything to two strangers, I think of Aldous Marsh, and of the folded Times upon his neat desk, and of the frightened, faithful, unregarded little man who found at the very last a courage that all his betters had never suspected in him. And I am reminded, as Holmes wished me to be reminded, that there is no one in this world so small or so timid that we may safely hold him cheap, and that the quietest lives sometimes end in the loudest justice. Marsh has his stone now in a country churchyard, with an honest name upon it, and no word of the lie that was so nearly buried with him. It cost the nation nothing, and it cost Colonel Reginald Holt everything. And I do not think, taking it all in all, that I ever assisted my friend in a case whose ending I have looked back upon with a quieter satisfaction.